It's been a while since we've released a major update for Brass Necessity. Haven't heard of it? Don't worry. Brass Necessity is a sci-fi dark fantasy adventure game. You can currently play as one of two characters, Norma and Ulysses. They've both been stranded on a faraway, interdimensional, or shall we say, cursed planet. You must fight your way through ghoulish hordes to find a way out if you can. If you haven't already given our early access game a whirl, well, you should. There's some exciting changes in the pipeline that we hope will pique your interest, so strap in and get your laser ready to carve out the changes coming this March. Brass Necessity takes some inspiration from some of our childhood favorites. One of the biggest is Zelda, and we're bringing that classic dungeon puzzle feel to the game with some new puzzle mechanics. You, the player, need to figure out the path to get through the dungeons and which order things should be collected. The first of these are portals, which are already in the game, but here's a brief recap in case you're new. Portals take the player between different areas of a dungeon. Sometimes a portal may be disabled or even hidden until the player takes some action, such as beating up some undead or completing other areas of a dungeon. We're actually planning a revamp of our portals in the future, so if you're not keen on their current look, you can blame me for now and my subpar sprite making skills until I've decided on a more stylistic look that will probably involve particle effects. Now, let's take a look at our next puzzle that's completely new to this update. I have ever so cleverly named them laser gates. What exactly are they? Well, they're gates that you open with your laser. What exactly about that is a puzzle element? Well, you can only open the gate if your current laser type or color matches the gate's color. Herein lies the puzzle. You may have to fight some baddies or even open up other laser gates before you can get the crystal you actually need. This takes direct inspiration from the older Zelda-like puzzles. Laser gates also have made their way into the game's central hub, the Cursed Sanctuary. They're actually a key part of your progress through the game. They block off areas of the Cursed Sanctuary until you've completed a dungeon. Usually that means a new dungeon for you to work your way through, or the end of the game. The final area of the game, which is still in progress, will only be reachable by opening a special laser gate. And our final new major puzzle is a funky one. I've named this one the fence puzzle. When you walk into a certain area, you trigger a nasty trap. You, the player, will be trapped between fences and forced to fight through a horde of enemies in a small space. These encounters are riskier, but are required to progress the game. Sometimes you have to get through this trap just to get to the next part of the dungeon. Other times, you need to finish the puzzle just to get a crystal. This puzzle will appear in future dungeons as well, but with a couple of twists on this current formula. If you have ideas for how I could use this puzzle, leave it down in the comments. If you've played the current Brass Necessity, you'll know there are 5 levels that follow a sequential order. The first 2 levels act as a test that you understand the core mechanics. Not a straight-up tutorial. I hate forced tutorials. There is a problem with this though. If you've watched our last video, you'll know one of the early inspirations for the game was Spyro and the hub level system. Well, we don't actually have one of those. Oops. But in this update, we've finally added one. I've also added some brand new areas. In total, there are now 1 and 2 half dungeons with a total of 8 different areas. Some areas are reworked, but more than 50% of the areas are completely new. So if you haven't played the game yet, or if you have, it's worth revisiting. While the game isn't story heavy, there's also a backstory that I've leaned into to establish these new key areas. For one, the characters are all space miners, and they use their lasers to mine things, like space crystals. The story begins in one of their mining outposts, which has collapsed. This is the new setting of our first starter dungeon. The first 2 levels in the current version of Brass Necessity have been completely reworked and stylized. We have fallen rocks and statues. The area will introduce some simple portal and laser gate puzzles to teach the player the game's core mechanics and controls. Once you complete this area, you'll head to safety in the next new area, the Cursed Sanctuary, which I mentioned earlier. The Cursed Sanctuary, which will be like a mini dungeon or half dungeon in its own right, is the hub level I've spoken so much about. After you've beaten the mining outpost, loading the game will always start you in this area. You'll find the other members of your team chilling in the Cursed Sanctuary. Currently, it's just Norma and Ulysses, but the team will grow with future updates. This area really brings in the dark fantasy vibe I've started to add. It's supposed to provide the illusion of safety for the character after the mining cave-in, but is it really safe? Safe or not, the characters don't have much of a choice. They're going to have to do something to get off this planet, still have to explore, and in this dark fantasy setting, there's going to be a lot in store for the players. Around the area, there are portals the player can enter and laser gates blocking the player's progress into other areas. The yellow portals lead to mysterious realms on this alien planet. Each realm is a themed dungeon the player must complete. As you progress through each dungeon, you'll progress through the Cursed Sanctuary as well. While I've worked on the level design of this area, we've had help from the community for our environment and lighting. One of our artists who's helped out has made a huge improvement in the layout and style of the level. So let's take a look at the first proper dungeon of the game, the Abandoned Castle. This dungeon has 5 parts, with mostly new content. However, if you've been playing so far, you might notice a couple of reworked areas. I've worked really hard to bring the atmosphere to a similar quality as our hub level. I've even added some flickering torches and made a custom volumetric fog asset. I really like how each area is looking now, but what do you think? I'm kind of hoping the dark lighting mixed with light from the flames adds a creepy ambiance. Currently, the Abandoned Castle is the only dungeon to complete, so we'll be adding more dungeons in future updates, but the Abandoned Castle is actually quite challenging. I found it difficult to beat it without dying. So good luck to all the players out there. And once you've beaten it, you can start preparing yourself for the next dungeon, the Crystal Caverns. Now that we've taken a look at the visual improvements, let's take a look at how we've improved the gameplay. The biggest update is the player controller. We've listened to the feedback on our controls. Turns out they weren't very intuitive. Moving is still the same. Use WASD or the arrow keys. The biggest change is shooting the laser. To fire, you now use the space key, not J, and loading new ammo, the shift key. But what about sprinting? Because that used to be the shift key. Well, we've just made that the default player speed. Walking was really slow and didn't really add anything to the game. We've also updated the laser in a big way. If you fire your laser too long and it overheats, you'll now damage yourself and nearby enemies. And yes, you can kill your character if you just spam the laser. It's a terrible way to game over, but I love it. This adds a cool challenge in shooting the laser, using your ammo and handling crowd control. Simply spamming the laser is not quite good enough to get you through the dungeons. When you're not slaughtering foes, you can now talk to your fellow miners in the Cursed Sanctuary. If you're interested in story elements, this is where most of the narrative and Brass Necessity will be delivered. As you progress through the game, the different characters will say different things, either giving hints about challenging areas or providing some background on the lore of the game. To help support the dialogue and story mechanics, we've also added save progress. Save progress is a pretty big thing, so how does it work? Simply put, every time you do a major action like beating a dungeon or unlocking a new area, your progress is automatically saved. As a cool bonus for those completionists, each character has independent save progress, so you can beat the game as both Norma and Ulysses and any future characters. To get the full picture and all character dialogue, you actually need to beat the game for each character. But not everyone is a completionist, and I get that, so don't panic. If you don't want to beat the game 5 times, you'll still get the overarching story through just one character. Each character does play differently, so it's still worth trying out the other characters and experimenting if you feel up to the challenge. Outside the player character, we also have some updates for the enemies. In general, we've added some behind the scenes updates, like balancing the power and speed of the enemies. All enemies now hit harder, but the biggest update is that we've extended our enemy AI logic in a massive way. We can now more easily update and add new enemy behavior, so expect to see more variations in the future. In fact, we've used the system to customize the behavior of our new enemy. We've added the Warrior, a new thematic enemy specific to the Abandoned Castle environment. The Warrior, partially inspired by the Dark Souls Black Knight, is a tough enemy that can easily cut through the player. You'll also have to be careful. Their shields completely block any laser damage, and they don't get stunned like weaker enemies. But maybe you don't always have to kill the knights. Maybe sometimes it's simply safer to run away. Well, that about wraps up all the major changes, but we have some small, nice wins and fixes that are worth a shout out as well. We've updated most of the fonts in the game, and we've even added some stylized transition scenes for the different areas. We've done this to give a little bit more personality to the new areas outside the improved lighting and environments. We've also made some minor updates to the player HUD, like making the life bar sleeker. The HUD, especially the laser ammo and overheating portions, will be overhauled in a future update. I'm still thinking of a design that I can actually do with my art skills. On to music. There was an annoying bug that could cause multiple tracks to play if the player quickly approached and retreated from an enemy. We revamped our music handler, so this should no longer happen. Only one track at a time is allowed, even if the player is towing the boundary of the enemy's sightline. And finally, I made a pretty big back-end change for the type matchups. Before, there was quite a complicated relationship between all the different crystals. Now I've simplified it substantially. Each crystal only has about one advantage and disadvantage. This change should make the system easier to learn and remember during your playthroughs. Well, all in all, it's been a while since we've updated Brass Necessity. I think I had some soul searching to do to find some motivation, but I'm really excited about this update. Just to recap, in this update, you'll see a lot of new features. The biggest change is the additional areas, the mining outpost, Cursed Sanctuary, and Abandoned Castle. The Cursed Sanctuary is a central hub where you can talk to other characters and where you'll access future areas. The current update also includes enhanced portal puzzles and 2 new puzzle elements in the form of laser gates and enclosed enemy battles. I've reworked the player controls and improved the stats of enemies to increase the risk and reward of combat. There are also quite a few bug fixes and general tidying of features to allow better development going forward. This update is releasing in mid-March. I'm currently planning for a Friday, either the 14th or 21st of March. So mark your calendars. The game is already available on Steam, but if you haven't wishlisted for the full release, please do so. It really helps us with the algorithm. If you haven't played it, go ahead and try the current version today on Steam, and submit any feedback, especially if it hasn't already been addressed in this video. And now, some good news for the pace of development going forward. After we release this update, we'll be changing things up slightly to help push improvements out at a faster pace. So in addition to major updates like these, I'll also be including smaller interim releases so you can keep seeing progress. Until then, keep an eye out for new videos and potentially a devlog for a new solo project. Well, not a community developed game at least. Thanks so much if you managed to hang on until the end. This is our longest video yet, but there was a lot of information to pack in. I hope it was worth it. Well, see you next time. Bye!